Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Well, I am very excited today because we have Laurie James on the podcast. So welcome everybody. And she just wrote this book that's coming out soon called Sandwiched. And most of you are listening to this, so you can't see what I'm pointing at, but she wrote a book called Sandwiched, a memoir of holding on and letting go. And that is coming out, and she has an incredible story to tell. So rather than me tell it, that's why she's here. So, Laurie, I'll turn it over to you to share about you and what's coming up for you.
Well, thank you, Karen, for having me. I'm so excited to be here with you. I'm a mother and caregiver and divorcee and now author and a transformative coach. I wrote my book, and it really chronicles about an 8-year period of my life when I found myself sandwiched between raising 4 teenage daughters. My marriage began to crumble, and my mother felt suddenly ill and needed care. So it was a very challenging time for me, but there was a lot of growth that happened during that time as well.
Well, I can only imagine for sure. What can you tell us about the moment, if there was one, where you realized, oh my gosh, I have to write a book?
That's an interesting story because it actually all started with the caregivers and the caregiver stories. I would come home and tell my then husband and my girlfriends, "You're not going to believe what happened today." Because I came home with stories about caregivers that were stealing, drinking on the job.
My gosh.
One emotionally seduced my dad, and believe it or not, scarily, one of them tried to convince me that it was my mom's time to die. And so I called her the angel of death in my book because, and of course, I got rid of her. But that's really how my writing started, because it was like, I couldn't make this stuff up if I tried, you know?
Wow. Oh my gosh. Yeah, exactly. Like every one of those sounds like a story I want to hear more about. Oh my goodness. Well, what was it like to see your book for the first time when you got the
Oh, I just got chills all over. It was such a long journey to write it, because I think from the very first time that even people suggested, "Laura, you need to write these stories down uh, because you can't make this stuff up." Um, it probably was about 7 or 8 years until I was completely finished with it. And so, yeah, it was a very surreal but very rewarding experience.
Hmm. What would you say, just out of curiosity, to someone who's looking to write a book but maybe has been kind of kicking around the idea and hasn't done it yet but wants to?
I would say if it's something that keeps popping up into your life and keep nudging you, I would say do it. Um, I think writing a book it requires discipline, perseverance, confidence, courage, and what better way to grow your confidence than write a book?
Yeah, absolutely. Isn't that the truth? Well, and
Yeah,
you're part of my community that igniting your confidence is all that I'm about for
yeah.
sure. And what would you say has really been a stepping point for you to I mean, I obviously writing the book, but
Uh-huh.
I'm curious about the process of writing the book. How did you feel from a confident perspective? Like, was there a certain time when you thought, oh, wow, I've really turned the corner here?
When I really turned the corner, I think when I finally turned my book in, my manuscript,
Oh,
and because I felt at that point it was complete. I felt like I had, because the whole writing process, there's you kind of just for lack of better word, forgive me, but you vomit everything on the page, especially when it's a memoir, because there's so much information. And then you just write everything possible, and then you start cutting things out and deciding what you want to keep and what you don't want to keep. Usually I had help from my writing coach and my editor, thank God. Um, and and it's a process, right? It's not necessarily it's a long process. So yes, I think when I turned in my book, that was definitely the time, because I felt like at that point I felt like it was complete and I had given it everything.
Hmm. That's incredible. Well, I'm so excited for you and all that is going to come of it.
Thank you. I am too.
So I want to dive in deeper with part of the story that you tell. I mean, your story, obviously, you've had a tremendous amount of loss. And I'm wondering what advice you have for women. Well, first of all, if you could share a little bit about your story
Okay.
and anything that you feel would be relevant for women to hear. And then specifically, what kind of advice would you offer someone who is experiencing similar losses?
So for me, my story, as I said earlier, it really covers this 8-year period of time in my life. And my mother struggled with dementia for 13 years before she passed away. And she just passed away a year ago last week.
Oh, wow.
And so I think being sandwiched between raising kids and taking care of elderly parents is such a challenge. And it affects 40% of all individuals between the ages of 40 and 60. Believe it or not,
Wow.
everybody is affected. I mean, I think your mother's still alive in Minneapolis, right? And I don't
Mhm.
know what kind of health she's in, but especially during COVID, I mean, we're very worried. We've been very worried about our elderly parents. So I feel like in some ways my book actually, and I'm getting off tangent here a little bit, but is even more relevant because so many people have been affected by that. I think it's important to be kind to ourselves,
Mm.
really,
Mhm.
and to give ourselves that time to grieve. For me, with the loss of m- m- my mother, it was over a long period of time, but even when she finally passed, it still was painful, even though I knew it was coming at some point, and I had mourned some of that loss during those 12 years that she had dementia. The loss of my marriage, that ended up ultimately being my decision in the end, but to leave my marriage. But yeah, allow yourself to feel the emotions and to grieve and to be kind with yourself.
Mhm.
Would be the best advice I could give other women.
That's so important. And isn't it
Yeah.
that we are typically our own worst critic and we take
Yes.
care of everybody else first before
Yeah.
ourselves?
Yes.
So I
So
want to
true.
underscore that and the importance of being able to even identify what your need is. And a lot of times we don't take the time to grieve. I mean, it wasn't until I was 40 years old that I realized that, oh, there's grief beyond someone dying. Like there's grieving
Yes.
losses of any kind. So I love that you brought that up because I'm a huge believer in that, to grieve whatever loss it is so you can clear out space to move forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Speaking of loss, tell us about a time when you didn't speak up but wished that you had.
Well, I've actually spent most of my life not speaking up for myself. Um, and that stems from some of my childhood experiences that silenced me, that people can read a little bit more about in my book. And I probably spent the first 15 years of my marriage not really speaking up for myself or having needs in my marriage. So that's a that's a loaded question, But I think once I started speaking up for myself is when I realized that I deserve to be heard and that I deserve to have a say in what's happening. And that was monumental in me having the confidence to write my book.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's awesome. I mean, it's sad that and unfortunate that it happened, but I feel like for any woman listening too, that there's usually some type of turning point where you go, okay, now I'm going to move forward
Yes.
into this. Yeah. And what was it like when you started feeling that confidence? I'm curious, just what did you feel more empowered?
Oh, definitely. I felt more empowered. I felt more confidence. I felt more courageous, and it's almost like you're at the edge of a cliff and you're trying to, and you're teetering, right? And the
Mhm.
fear of jumping off because you're not sure that you're going to be caught when you at the bottom of it, but then you do, and you take that step and you're like, oh, there's a ledge I can just step down on and I'm not going to fall into the abyss, right?
Yes.
And just taking those small little steps is just every step has continued to build my confidence.
That's fantastic. Oh my goodness. I love that. Well, and I think it's such a good reminder for everybody listening that taking that one step at a time is important, that it doesn't have to be this huge endeavor. It's just try something today that will make a choice for yourself of some sort for
Yeah.
sure.
Yes.
Well, you have a lot of expertise, and I'd love to know if you were to offer one piece of advice for a woman
Hmm.
based on advice that you've been given. This is a little bit of a switch now, but really what would you say is the best piece of advice that you've been given, and what would you like to impart to other women related to that?
So, a close friend of mine, a very dear girlfriend of mine, years ago told me to follow the love.
Hmm.
And it was a time in my life when I was reaching out. My kids were just, because I have four daughters, so my kids were just getting old enough where I felt like I had a little bit more time for myself. And so I was starting to look for more female relationships with other moms. And she came into my life, and at the time I was struggling with a relationship, a girlfriend relationship, and she said, really follow the love. And that has really been a game changer for me.
Mm,
And I have shared that with both my clients and other girlfriends, and it's been a game changer for them too. I think we sometimes try so hard to make relationships work,
mhm.
and they don't. And that's when I think we just need to take a step back and say, why is this not working? And maybe take a step back and go, okay, I'm going to create, give this relationship a little distance, and let me try another relationship and see if I can foster one where I am feeling cared for and loved and it's reciprocal.
Right. That's a very good point.
Yeah.
Isn't it amazing how often we'll stay in relationships, even friendships that
Yeah.
aren't serving us? It's just so hard sometimes to figure out how to get out. I
Yeah.
think that brings up a whole other yeah,
And
go
to,
ahead.
yeah, and to detach, it's a challenge sometimes.
Mhm. Yeah. It reminds me of the whole concept of boundaries and how
Yes.
it goes back to identifying our needs, knowing what those are, and then being able to say what we need without being dependent upon the other person's approval of us or the disappointment that we might cause. And
Yes.
I can remember being in a marriage seminar once where the facilitator had us turn to each other and actually say, I will let you down. I thought it was awesome because it just level sets everything. It's just
Yeah.
this is the reality of what
Right.
it's going to be like, whatever the relationship is. We
Right.
we are, it doesn't
We're
mean we
human.
yeah. And you know how often it is that we define ourselves like we think of ourselves as a disappointment, but we're not a disappointment. It's just we disappointed someone in that moment.
Right,
I think,
right.
yeah, we can get so caught up in how we see ourselves and look at ourselves as defined human beings as opposed to just, in that moment we had a certain situation happen.
Well, and I agree, and I think because of the social world that we live in, we try so hard to be perfect and to be the perfect friend and to be the perfect wife or the perfect husband or whatever it is, and we lose sight that we're perfectly imperfect,
Yeah,
right, as human beings, and that's okay.
right.
Right? I mean, I think that's the beauty in humanity is that we are all different and we're all perfectly imperfect.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That's a great segue into what I wanted to also ask you, which I always love to ask people is what is the biggest mistake that you've made and how did you recover? Or what you consider
Oh,
a failure?
I th- as I think about it, uh, I would say after I left my marriage, about a year and a half after I left my marriage, I took on way too much. I felt this sense of freedom after I left my marriage because there were controlling aspects of my marriage. And I'm a free spirit at heart. And my kids were gone. I had finished raising my kids. And so I said yes to everything. I said yes to writing. I said yes to dating. I said yes to, going out with girlfriends. And then I got to a point where I was just stressed out. And it wasn't because of anything bad that was happening in my life. Everything was good, but I just had way too much going on. And and I didn't know how to back out of it.
Mm.
And so I ended up getting very sick and ended up in the hospital twice. So I would say that taking on too much stress. I mean, that was my biggest mistake. And and I guess the advice that I would give other people is listen to those little voices in your head and take time for yourself. And it's okay to say no.
Mhm.
If it doesn't feel right, it's okay to say no.
Mhm.
We as women, I don't think do that enough.
Yeah, exactly. Do you have any tips on that? Like when you think about things that you might have said no to in your life? I know that I'm always challenged with saying no. In other words, it's one thing to say no, but you know how a lot of times women will then take that next step of sort of explaining all the
Yeah.
reasons why. And I'm just curious if you have anything that you would do
Yeah, there's
or give me an
you know,
example.
we don't need to apologize for saying no.
Mhm.
I mean, I think as women, we're always, taking on everything and doing everything for everybody. And we're really good at juggling and multitasking,
Right.
right? But it's okay. It doesn't matter if it's, planning the spring fundraiser for the PTA or volunteering in the classroom or going out with a girlfriend. One of the things that I've learned through the coaching training that I've done and through my own experience is if I'm unsure, I will say, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. And I sit with it and I sleep with it overnight. And I actually like, how does this feel? Does it
Mm.
feel because we're so in our heads all the time about making decisions. So I like, does this feel right for me? Does this feel like this is something that's going to feed me? And and further what is it going to bring me joy?
That's so great.
Right.
I love
And so that's how I make my decisions now. I haven't always made my decisions that way, but that's how I make my decisions now.
that is brilliant advice because I also think that many of us feel like we have to respond in the moment.
Yeah.
And just the acknowledgement to give ourselves permission that we can think about it.
Yes. It's
It's
okay.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think about that too with job offers. Sometimes people feel like, "Oh, I have to say yes right away." as
Right.
opposed to just waiting, thinking about it and coming back. Oh, I think that's fantastic. Is there any story that you would share from the book, maybe one of your favorites? Or, I mean, obviously the book is your life. So anything about your life that you would like to share with us that is one of your favorite parts, perhaps?
One of my favorite parts, oh, well, let me think about this. The ending. That sounds really bad, but the ending.
And I'm guessing you may not want to tell us the ending yet. If you do, go for it. Or is there a lesson, big overall, that the ending represents?
I think the big overall representation that the ending represents is be true to yourself,
Mm,
and don't look for external forces or factors to either heal, your insecurities, or cover up, or replace your insecurities. Because really, as we know, Karen, right? I mean, our confidence and our self-worth come from within,
hmm.
right? And so as long as you're true to yourself, and um you're listening to your intuition, your women's intuition, that will be your best guide in life. So and it took me 51 years to figure that out.
The beautiful thing is that you figured it out. Like, one of my favorite phrases is up until now. And whatever has happened in the past, it's like,
Yeah,
okay, that was up until now, and we can all make the choice to shift.
yeah.
Well, anything else, Lori, that you'd like to share with everybody before we wrap up?
Just thank you for having me on here. I'm just so honored and excited to be part of your podcast.
Oh, thank you, Lori. Well, I always like to typically end with some type of fun question. So
Okay.
one that I haven't said or prepared you for at all.
Okay.
And let me ask you this. What is something that you never leave home without besides your mask or your phone?
Oh, besides my mask or my phone? Oh, that's okay. Well, lately it's my dog. And I think my friends are getting a little tired of me because I bring my dog everywhere.
Oh, how cute. What kind of dog?
It's a husky, actually, a Siberian husky.
No
So
way.
so and she's on the larger side. So she's a 75-pound Siberian husky.
Oh my gosh. And what's her name?
Her name is Lou, and we adopted her a year ago. One of my daughters talked me into adopting her a year ago, and she's really been one of the best things that's happened to me
Oh,
and to us, all of us.
that is so
Yeah,
wonderful. That's wonderful. Well, I know, tell us when your book is coming out and then where we can reach you.
wonderful. My book is coming out on June 23rd of this year of 2021, but you can pre-order it on Amazon or through IndieBound, which if you want to support one of your local bookstores, you can purchase it through them. You can find me on Instagram at Laurie.James and Facebook at Laurie James Author, or my website at Laurie, Laurie, middle initial E, James.com. So that's LaurieEJames.com.
Great. Fabulous. And we'll have all the links, of course, in the bio section. So I'm thrilled that you could be here, Lori, and it's all the best to you on your book. I
Thank
love your story and just thank you for all that you endured in your life to now be able to share with us in a way that is victorious. So I thank you very much for being here.
thank you so much for having me, Karen.
And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.